Recently, President Donald Trump made new comments about the Panama Canal. These comments have put the canal back in the news. People are talking about it again. Because of this new attention, it is a good time to learn more about this famous waterway. We need to understand its story, especially its connection with the United States and why the current president of the U.S. wants it back. The United States and the Panama Canal have a very long and sometimes difficult history together. This relationship started over 100 years ago. Many things have happened between the U.S. and Panama because of the canal. Knowing this history is important. It helps explain the news we hear today. It shows us how the past affects the present situation. The way the U.S. and the canal are connected has changed a lot over time. This book tells the story of the Panama Canal and its relationship with the United States. We will look at the important facts and events from the past. The information here tries to be fair and balanced. We will not try to say if past actions were good or bad. The main goal is to give you clear background information. We want to help you understand the complex history without taking sides. Many key moments shaped the story of the Panama Canal. Big decisions were made by leaders in both the United States and Panama. Building the canal was a massive project with many challenges. Later, there were important talks and agreements about who should control the canal. These decisions led to big changes. Understanding these key events helps us see how we got to the current situation. We will look at these important points in the canal's history. The Panama Canal is more than just a waterway. It is very important for the whole world. It acts like a bridge between two huge oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific. Before the canal existed, ships had to make a very long and dangerous trip around the tip of South America. The canal created a shortcut. This shortcut saves ships many days of travel time. This is very important for global trade, as ships carry goods like food, electronics, and cars between countries much faster. It saves a lot of money too. The canal is also important for military ships, allowing navies to move between oceans quickly. We will explore why this narrow strip of water is so significant for Panama's economy, for U.S. interests, and for international shipping. Learning about the canal helps us understand how different parts of the world are connected. 2. An old dream. For a very long time, people dreamed about making a special path for ships across Panama. Panama is a narrow piece of land. This path, called a canal, would be a water road connecting the two biggest oceans, the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. It would be a very important shortcut. Ships would not need to travel the very long way around the bottom of South America. That long trip took many weeks. A canal would make the journey much faster and safer. People thought about this idea for centuries, but building such a big canal was extremely hard. For a long time, the technology was not good enough. Finally, in the year 1881, France decided to try and build the canal. The French started a company and workers came to Panama. They began digging the land to make the channel for water, but the work in Panama was very dangerous and difficult. The land had thick jungles and mountains. The weather was very hot. There was heavy rain for many months each year. Workers also got sick from terrible diseases like malaria and yellow fever. Many thousands of workers died during the construction effort. The French company worked hard for 9 years. They spent a huge amount of money, but they had little to show for it. They did not make enough progress on the canal. Building the canal was much harder than the French first expected. So after 9 years of problems and many deaths, the French company stopped the project. This happened in the year 1890. The dream of a canal across Panama seemed very difficult. The French attempt had failed. Around this time, another country became very interested in the Panama Canal, the United States. America understood that a canal would be very useful for their country. It would help trade ships move goods much faster between the East Coast and the West Coast of America, for example, between New York City and San Francisco. It would save a lot of time for businesses. The canal was also very important for the American Navy. It had strategic value. Without a canal, Navy ships had to travel the long way around South America to get from one side of the country to the other. This journey took many weeks. It meant the U.S. Navy could not move its warships quickly from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean to respond to problems. A canal would allow the Navy to bring its powerful ships together much faster when needed. A canal could save ships about 16 days of travel time. America's interest grew more after the year 1898. In that year, the U.S. won a war against Spain. America got new lands far away, like Puerto Rico and the Philippines. The U.S. also added Hawaii. With these new places, the U.S. Navy needed to move its ships between the oceans even more quickly to protect them. A canal in Panama seemed essential for America's navy and trade. The failed French project meant someone else could try. The United States started making serious plans to build the canal. 3. America builds it. After the French company stopped building the canal because the work was too hard and many workers died, the United States wanted to finish it. The canal was very important for the U.S. It would help their Navy ships travel much faster between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Before, ships had to go all the way around South America, which took a long time. The U.S. needed a faster way to move its Navy after it got new lands like Puerto Rico and the Philippines in 1898. At that time, Panama was part of Colombia. In 1902, the U.S. started talking with Colombia about building the canal, but after 1 year they could not agree. The U.S. government became impatient. Some people in Panama wanted their own country. The U.S. decided to help them. In 1903, the U.S. supported Panama's fight for independence. The U.S. sent Navy ships to Panama's coasts. These ships stopped Colombia from sending soldiers to stop the new country. A thick jungle also made it hard for Colombian soldiers to reach Panama by land. With U.S. help, Panama became independent, but this help had conditions. Panama needed protection from Colombia. The U.S. had power over Panama now. The U.S. told Panama, "Agree to our canal treaty or we will leave." Without U.S. protection, Colombia might attack. Panama felt forced to choose. They signed the Hay-Bunavarilla Treaty with the U.S. near the end of 1903. This treaty was good for the U.S. It gave the United States complete control over a large piece of land in Panama forever. This land was 5 miles wide on each side of the planned canal route. It was called the Canal Zone. It became like a territory of the United States inside Panama. The U.S. agreed to pay Panama $10 million once and $250,000 every year. The U.S. started building the canal in the Canal Zone. It took about 10 years of hard, dangerous work. The canal opened in 1914. Building it cost a lot of money, almost $500 million. Sadly, the human cost was also high. Around 5,600 workers died during the American building time. Most were not Americans, they came from Caribbean islands. They died from accidents and sicknesses like malaria and yellow fever. 4. Living apart. The Panama Canal Zone was a special area inside Panama, but it was not really part of Panama. The treaty from 1903 gave the United States control over this land forever. It was like a small piece of the U.S., run by Americans. The zone was quite large, stretching about 5 miles wide on each side of the canal. It measured more than 1,400 square kilometers in total. This strip of land went across Panama, cutting the country into 2 separate parts. The main cities of Panama City and Colon were not inside the zone. Life in the Canal Zone was very different from life in the rest of Panama. The zone had its own American police force and its own courts. It followed U.S. laws, not Panamanian laws. Many American soldiers and workers lived there with their families in towns built by the U.S. There were important U.S. military bases inside the zone. People of different races often lived in separate areas. It was segregated. For the U.S. military, the zone was very useful. It helped them move Navy ships and soldiers quickly between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, especially during wars far away. However, many Panamanians did not like the Canal Zone being there. They felt it was deeply unfair that the U.S. controlled a large piece of their country permanently. To them, it felt like the U.S. was acting like an old empire from the past. Over the years, people in Panama became angrier about the American presence. They started to protest more often against the American control. They wanted the Canal Zone to become part of Panama again. The feelings of unhappiness and tension grew bigger over time. In January 1964, a specific event made things much worse. It started with a problem about flags. A high school inside the Canal Zone was not allowed to fly the Panamanian flag next to the American flag. Some young Panamanian students felt this was wrong and disrespectful. They decided to march peacefully to the edge of the zone to show their flag and protest. But the situation quickly became violent. Serious riots started between Panamanians outside the zone and the U.S. soldiers and police inside. The fighting lasted for several days and caused a lot of damage. Buildings and property worth millions of dollars were destroyed. Very sadly, people died during the riots. Reports say about 22 Panamanians and 4 American soldiers lost their lives. Hundreds more Panamanians were injured in the violence. Panama still remembers this very sad time every year. They call it Martyrs' Day to honor those who died. After these terrible events, the relationship between Panama and the U.S. became very difficult. Panama broke off its official connections with the U.S. government. They said they would only start talking again if the U.S. agreed to negotiate a new treaty about the canal's future. The U.S. government also began to understand that keeping the Canal Zone was causing serious, ongoing problems and damaging its image in Latin America. 5. A new agreement. The big problems in 1964 changed things. After the riots, Panama stopped talking normally with the United States. Panama said talks would only start again if the U.S. agreed to discuss giving back the canal. Some leaders in the U.S. started to think differently about the canal zone. They saw that keeping control of the zone was causing anger in Panama. They worried that the U.S. Army would have to use force again in the future. This did not look good to other countries, especially in Latin America. The U.S. wanted good relationships with these countries because of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. An agreement was almost made, but then Panama's government changed in 1968 and the agreement did not happen. Later, in 1973, the United Nations discussed the canal. The U.S. stopped a plan that asked America to return the canal to Panama, but the pressure continued. Other countries thought the U.S. should leave. Even important American leaders like Henry Kissinger worked hard to find a solution. He warned that there could be big problems in Latin America if the U.S. did not make a new deal with Panama. When Jimmy Carter became president in 1977, he wanted to solve the canal problem. He believed giving the canal back was important. Some people think Carter just gave away something valuable, but it was also a careful plan. Carter thought it would make the U.S. look better around the world and improve friendships with Latin American countries. This was important during the Cold War competition. So in 1977, President Carter and Panama's leader, Omar Torrijos, signed two new agreements. These were called the Torrijos-Carter treaties. The U.S. government approved them the next year in 1978. The treaties made big changes. First, the canal zone area would disappear. All the land in the zone went back to Panama in 1979. Second, the U.S. and Panama would run the canal together for many years. Then, on the last day of 1999, Panama would get full control of the canal. The treaties also said the canal must stay neutral. This means ships from all countries could use it fairly. The U.S. got the right to use its military to protect the canal's neutrality if needed. Not everyone in America was happy about this decision. Some people strongly disagreed with giving the canal to Panama. One famous person who disagreed was Ronald Reagan. When he wanted to become president, he often said, "We built it, we paid for it, and we're going to keep it." Many people cheered when he said this. His supporters used the issue to get more money and excitement for campaigns. But when Reagan became president later, he did not try to stop the treaties or take back the canal. 6. Soldiers come back. The time for Panama to get full control of the canal was coming closer, as planned in the treaties. But before the final day arrived, there was more trouble. The leader of Panama at that time was a man named Manuel Noriega. For some years, Noriega had worked with the United States. But later, the relationship between Noriega and the U.S. government became very bad. The U.S. said Noriega was involved in selling illegal drugs. They also said he was not respecting democracy in Panama. In 1989, he refused to accept election results that showed he lost. This made the U.S. government very unhappy. Things became more serious. Tension grew between the two countries. An American soldier was killed by Panamanian forces. This event led to a big decision by the U.S. president. On December 20, 1989, the United States sent its military to Panama. Many thousands of American soldiers arrived suddenly. This invasion was called Operation Just Cause. There was fighting between the U.S. soldiers and Noriega's forces. Cities saw fighting, and it was a difficult time for people living there. The main goal of the invasion was to remove Manuel Noriega from power. The American military action was quick and strong. They captured Noriega. He was then taken out of Panama to the United States. After Noriega was gone, democracy returned to Panama, but the invasion came at a cost. Sadly, people died during the fighting. 23 American soldiers lost their lives, and over 300 were injured. Many Panamanians were also killed, including soldiers and ordinary people living in the cities. This invasion is an event that many Panamanians, especially older people, remember very clearly today. It was surprising to some people what happened next. Even though the U.S. had just invaded the country, it did not change the plan for the canal. The United States kept the promise it made in the 1977 treaties with Panama. They respected the agreement to give the canal back. So, the final steps of the plan continued. The last day of American control came. On December 31, 1999, a special ceremony took place. At midday, the control of the Panama Canal officially passed from the United States to Panama. After almost 100 years, the canal was finally and completely in Panamanian hands. This was a very proud and important day for the country of Panama. They were now responsible for managing one of the world's most important waterways. 7. New problems arise. Panama took full control of the canal on the last day of 1999. Since that time, Panama has managed this important waterway. They have done a lot of work. Panama invested $5 billion of its own money to make the canal bigger. They added a wider set of locks. This big project opened in 2016. Because of this work, much larger container ships can now travel between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans using the canal. This helps trade move faster between places like Asia and the east coast of the United States. The canal is very important for Panama's economy. About 13,000 ships pass through it every year. This is around 6% of all global sea trade. These ships pay fees, called tolls, to use the canal. This brings Panama about $2.5 billion in money each year. This income is a large part of Panama's total economy, around 7.7%. The canal is more than just money for Panama. It is a great source of national pride for the small country. Recently, however, new problems have started. There have been statements from the United States that question Panama's control over the canal. These statements have created tension. One main claim is about the cost for ships to use the canal. Some people say Panama charges American ships too much money. They believe U.S. ships are being treated unfairly because they are the biggest users of the canal. Panama's leaders disagree with this claim. They say prices went up for all ships because there was less water in the lake that feeds the canal. Another big concern involves China. A private company from Hong Kong runs two cargo ports in Panama. One port is near the Atlantic entrance of the canal, and the other is near the Pacific entrance. This company won the right to manage these ports in 1997. Some people in the U.S. government are worried about this. They are concerned because Hong Kong is now under more direct control from mainland China. They fear China could use these ports to gather information or even disrupt canal operations, especially during a time of conflict. These worries about high costs and Chinese influence near the ports are the new problems facing the Panama Canal today. They create uncertainty about the future relationship between Panama and the United States regarding the canal. 8. Looking ahead, recent talk suggests Panama charges U.S. ships too much money. Is this true? Panama says prices went up for all ships, not just American ones. This happened because of a big problem with water. The lake that gives water to the canal, Lake Gatun, has low water levels because there was not enough rain. Less water means fewer ships can pass through the canal each day. Because fewer ships can go through, the price for each ship has increased. Panama says the price rise is the same for ships from every country. The treaties signed in 1977 say the canal must be neutral. This means Panama should treat all countries the same. Giving lower prices only to U.S. ships might break this rule. Also, U.S. warships have not paid very much to use the canal recently. Another concern is about China controlling the canal. This is not exactly true, but there are reasons for this worry. A company from Hong Kong called C.K. Hutchison manages two important ports near the canal. One port is on the Atlantic side and the other is on the Pacific side. These ports handle cargo for ships. Some people in the U.S. worry because Hong Kong is now more under the control of the main government in China. They fear China could use these ports in a bad way. For example, China might tell the company to gather information about U.S. Navy ships passing nearby. Or, in a time of conflict, they might try to block the canal or stop U.S. ships. However, these ports are separate from the canal itself. Ships do not have to go through these ports to use the canal, but the ports are close to the canal entrances. Taking the canal back with soldiers is not the only idea. There are other ways to deal with the worries about the ports. The U.S. or Panama could try to buy the ports from the Hong Kong company. If the company says no, maybe Panama could take control of the ports itself. This is called nationalization. But Panama would need help from the U.S. to do this because China would be very angry. Panama has started checking the money records of the port company. Maybe this check will find a reason to end the company's agreement. Another idea is for Panama to check the people who work at the ports more carefully. Using economic pressure, like stopping trade, might not work well. If the U.S. puts sanctions on Panama, other countries probably will not do the same. Panama could still trade with many other nations. This could push Panama to become closer friends with China, which is the opposite of what the U.S. wants. Using the military would be the worst choice. It would cause huge problems. Panama is currently a friendly country to the U.S. An invasion would end this friendship. It would make the U.S. look bad to the rest of the world, like it does not respect agreements. Taking the canal by force would be seen as an imperialist action. defending the canal would be very hard. Panama City is right next to the canal. Many Panamanians would be very angry. There could be protests or even fighting against U.S. soldiers for a long time. Using new technology like drones could make attacks on the canal easier for angry groups. It would cost a lot of money and lives. Panama has said clearly it will never give up control of the canal again. It is too important for their country and their pride.
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.